Hello, I'm Cody Sargent and today I'll be demonstrating normal mapping in Maya. In this tutorial video, I'll go over the creation of normal maps, applying normal maps to models, and the various options when creating normal maps within Maya. The first thing we need to look at is what normal maps can and cannot accomplish. Normal maps cannot change the geometry or silhouette of a model, only the light reflecting off of the surface. In the final version of this character, which was designed for the Unreal 3 engine, we can clearly see details reacting with light, such as scales, cables, and wires. I'm going to quickly isolate the selection of the hips, which is the part we'll be working with next, so we can see the resolution of the low poly mesh and all the details we're going to be baking onto it. When baking normal maps for video game characters, the low poly mesh is usually broken into several smaller sections. This allows them to be baked separately, which in turn has higher detail and less of a chance of pulling in artifacts from other parts of the mesh. To continue to the next part of the process, we're going to have to go to the rendering menu, lighting and shading, transfer maps. In here, because we had the low poly mesh selected, it automatically assigns it as the target mesh. The next thing we need to do is select the high poly mesh and add it to the source mesh queue list. Down here in the output section, I've already done this once before, so I will remove that map so I can show you what it looks like to begin with. You click on the Add Normal Map button. This will give us a normal map window. In here we have the place that we want to save the file as, so I will save it as normal for normal map. The file format we want to save it as. If we want to include materials, which this is more of an advanced option if your high poly mesh already has bump mapping, displacement mapping, or any other sort of detail mapping. It'll try to include this in the baking process and put this on the low poly mesh as well. I'm going to turn this off because I do not need this because I don't have my other mesh unwrapped or textured in any way. The next part is the map space, and there are several types of map spaces in 3D. Here are examples of the two different types of normal maps you can bake out of Maya: object space and tangent space. Object space normals are usually rainbow in color, and they're only good for objects that don't deform. So if you're building buildings, doors, because it's not deforming, it's just rotating, or vehicles, object space renders a little faster. Tangent space is great because it maps the angle based off of the original normal angle of the polygon. So most of it will end up either blue or purple in color, but it is great for characters because it can deform and move along with the character's mesh. For this demonstration, I'm choosing object space because I'm modeling a hard surface piece that won't need to do any deforming. Underneath here we have the Use Maya Common settings. By default, this is checked. All unchecking this for a normal map allows us to do is have the size, the resolution of the image, independent from anything else we're baking at the same time. By default, the Maya Common output setting for size is right here at the top. To make things easier to see, because both things are right next to each other, I'm going to have that checked off, and I'm going to have the resolution of the image set to 2048. This is in pixels. Underneath here we have Connect Maps to Shaders. You can choose this or take it off. What this does is take the normal map you have just made and apply it to either the shader, which would be what was applied before you started the baking process, or a new shader, which will create a new Lambert or a blend and apply the normal map to that, which then you'll manually have to apply it to the model. The last thing we need to check is up here in the target meshes category. And we can change this display from mesh to envelope. What this does is it shows us an envelope that needs to encompass everything we want baked into the low poly mesh. You can change the search envelope and do a general percentage, but it is fairly touchy. So let's try 1%. And that seems to cover it really well. If there are any parts that still stand out past a certain percentage, but you have most of it, just like any other mesh in Maya, you can right click, choose vertex, or choose any of the component modes, and move this mesh around. If I can click on my handles instead of on the mesh. So it is a very easy setup to edit. Now that we have our envelope encompassing everything we need, we are ready to go back to our transfer map window and click Bake. Using one of the many wonders of cinematography, the pause button, I've sped up the baking process. This is a process that does take a little bit of time, and different hardware will make it run at different speeds. So be patient and it will bake. It took me just under a minute to bake this, but I do have a fairly intensive computer made for doing 3D modeling. So now that we have it baked, we can exit out of this transfer map system and go back to our main window. We really need to go back into the hyper shade, so I'll pull that over and see that it created a new shader for us. In this case it was Lambert 3. So I'll come over, bring its attribute window with it, and rename this normal test for our purposes. And here you can choose color, bump map, and it seems to have already applied it. So we'll see how well it applied it and switch this to a blend so we can see the normal map a little clearer. Pull this away, we don't need that at the moment. And now we're back here at our main window. It doesn't look like anything has changed. First thing we need to do is go to high quality render settings. You're not going to be able to see normal maps by default using Maya's default viewport. You have to go to renderer, high quality rendering, and there are settings, and not all computers are compatible with this. So if you have compatible hardware, you'll notice a quick change. You'll say high quality rendering on it. There still isn't anything showing up, and this is because we don't have any textures visible. So we can just hit 6 on our keyboard, and now we have our texture on the model. I'm going to isolate the selection so you can see just the low poly model, and we can get a good example of all the details that baked in there. So this was a quick video tutorial on baking normal maps in Maya, and following this you have half a hit. Pretty cool.